Welcome back to Media 7, where we're talking about Fiji and the media with AUT's David Roby, TVNZ's Barbara Drever and Radio Tirana boss Robert Kahn. Barbara, in the setup at the top of the show, I mentioned this confrontation between John Key and Fiji's Attorney General at the Pacific Islands Forum, where John Key apparently told this man that he should be on trial. I read virtually nothing about that here. It's all over the Fijian press and the Pacific Island press in general. It seemed like quite a rash thing to say. Yeah, well, it was certainly an interesting thing to say, and it was something that I would have loved to have reported. Unfortunately, when we heard about that, it was midnight New Zealand time. It was just a technology reality. We had to get our piece out. We had to start sending it midday. Papua New Guinea time. The meeting hadn't even started when we were doing our piece that day. And I guess even the print media, to get it in the next day's paper, well, we only heard about it at midnight, so most of those papers I expected would have gone to bed. Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. It was a personal comment, and it was something that I, as the Attorney General, did pick up on and run with it. To be fair, though, there were a lot of other things that were said that it's just that he highlighted that particular point. Right. Robert, what did your listeners make of that? Was that an issue on the station?
It was interesting because our listeners were of the view that John Key had gone there for a purpose, and certainly wasn't to talk something like that. And I think one thing you've got to realise, the ex-Fiji residents here and our listeners, they're looking for a solution. They're not looking at a confrontational point of view, from a confrontational point of view, any conflict. And they saw that as, when that was reported, they saw it as an agenda that was predetermined by New Zealand when they went to the forum, and that there was no need to listen to what they have to say. Let's tell them what we want to do. And that's how, because AR said that, that's how it was portrayed back here.
And that's a fair point. You know, Kiribati and Tuvalu had quite different perspectives, which is why I interviewed them for our piece that night, because it did give another angle to the story, which is, you know, this is the reality for these small island nations.
But they did, both of those eventually got behind the ultimatum to the Fijian interim government to hold elections by December.
Yes, and since then Fiji has said they're now our enemies, so it'll be very interesting to see. But that also, remember, Australia stepped up and said, hey, anything goes wrong, we'll step in and support them financially. Well, how? You know, so I'd be surprised. Come May the 1st, we'll see what happens, see if Kiribati and Tuvalu, see what they do then.
But New Zealand's not very realistic about the expectation that we even knew demand of May announcing of a timetable of elections and elections by the end of the year. It's not feasible. From the Bainimarama's point of view and his grand vision, because he sees very much part of his role while the military-backed administration's in power is to change the electoral system. And I think there's a lot of support within Fiji, and we don't really get a sense of that in the media in New Zealand, that there is quite a lot of support. In the People's Charter process, something like 200 people have been involved in the various teams that were set up to establish some sort of consultative process. And although that's been criticised by many of the critics of the regime, the fact is that that group had a lot of very talented people in Fiji who really committed to seeing a way forward, as Robert says, a solution. They said, well, they've accepted, well, the coup happened, that you've got to have a solution to go forward. And part of that solution is changing the electoral system. Ever since independence, there's a deeply flawed electoral system. And even with the 99 elections after the 97 Constitution, those fundamental, there was a bit of tinkering in the electoral system, but the fundamental problem with the system in Fiji is it's race-based, and 46 of the 71 electorates are based on the ethnicity of the candidates for those 46 seats. But not only that, there's a gerrymander, because the rural indigenous Fijian seats are worth essentially it takes twice as many votes for the urban.
Yeah, it's quite easy to see Bainimarama as wanting to do the right thing, but I presume
there's nothing wrong with his vision.
But
it's how he's achieving it. And
yeah.
I think you'll find a lot of people in Fiji support his vision. And if you read the charter, there's a lot in it that actually makes a lot of damn good sense. But it's how it's being achieved, and the fact that the military are driving this, and even in this charter process, they are really a very big part of it, and there's just no getting away from that. And also, he keeps changing his mind. Like in 2007, in February, he said we can do the elections by 2010 at the latest. And then now he's saying, well, it could be 10 years. And that's because, you know.
I just want to pick on that. This is it. When there was a report that came out here said election in 10 years. We went and got the audio
up to 10 years.
Up to 10 years,
yeah.
But it was reported here that it said election in 10 years' time. Now, what the actual audio recording says, he says in Fijian, he says it could take up to 5 to 10 years to do it. That was the exact translation. So everything was lost in translation, and there was a big deal made about it.
Not on my piece, Robert.
No, I'm talking media in general.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, when he said 5 to 10, it's 5 to 10. It's not, you know, it's not a higher end.
I actually have to say, Barbara, when our researcher talked to Robert earlier in the week, you were the person he named as reporting accurately. You know.
I should be. I've got a lot of Fijians giving me accurate translations.
Maybe we could get just have a look at this contempt case that happened just last month with the Fiji Times. That seemed like bullying. You had a New Zealander, Christopher Pride, the same guy that brought the BSA complaint, arguing for $1 million fine and jail sentences for 3 or 4 people at that paper for running a letter to the editor on the website.
What they're trying to do is make an example of the Fiji Times. They've been out to get the Fiji Times one way or another. It wasn't enough to expel Evan Hanna last year, so it was really a matter of trying to give a warning to the other media. I think this is what the regime is trying to do, and well, it sets up even more of a chilling factor. I mean, you have to really admire the courage of journalists in Fiji and the main media organisations. But just to put it in a bit of context, I think, is that the letters to the editor in Fiji are rather different from New Zealand, for example. It's very, very robust, I think, as I'd describe it, but more than robust.
The one that got them in court was certainly robust.
And there's been a climate of things that are pretty dodgy as far as contempt of court, but the courts have never upheld contempt. I remember we were teaching, good practice years ago at USP, and a lot of the journalists reacted, oh, but nobody's ever done for contempt of court. But in this case, this letter was actually very, very damaging about the judges in the case. So yes, it was defamatory, but the newspaper apologised, the newspaper explained that it actually probably slipped up in processes that allowed the letter to get through, and it's just overkill to carry on and to seek fine.
I mean, one thing that fascinated me about that case was that the prosecutor was a New Zealander, Christopher Pride. The judge, Thomas Hickey, is an Australian. You seem to have quite a few Australians and New Zealanders caught up in the politics there.
Absolutely, and it's going to be very interesting too, because how the Hickey judgment in this case, and it's actually quite a lengthy judgment, and of course he's drawn on many precedents in the Commonwealth and so on, and how that judgment will actually affect but how, whether that'll have any impact as some kind of precedent elsewhere in the Commonwealth.
But you've got problems too, Russell, like for example, didn't help that an Australian journalist went and asked the judge for his opinion before he gave his judgment. I mean, you wouldn't do that here, you don't do it, and it just made it so much worse for international media, for all of us as journalists, when you have shenanigans like that going on.
Robert, perhaps we could finish with you. You're by virtue of being at the station, are closer to it than most of us. Where's it heading? Are you optimistic?
I have to say it needs a solution. No coup is good for any country. It's even worse if it's a failed coup. And this is heading towards that if we're going to have so much opposition. It needs to be helped. Fiji needs help, and I think everybody's got to get together and come up with a solution. I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you that being confrontational, getting into conflict, you're dealing with a military guy here, black and white, that's all he sees, right? And so let's try and actually play along and see what we can do, find a solution. I don't support coups, but I think democracy in New Zealand is different to democracy in Fiji. And I think you've touched on it very well by saying that there's problems in the electoral system. There's a whole heap of problems. They need to be solved. Maybe the method is not right, but it does need to be solved, because at the end of the day, if we don't solve that, these things will keep happening over and over again. And New Zealand needs to take a stance that would help this not happen again. Not another coup, not another Bainimarama. I'm sure Barbara and I don't enjoy going back to Fiji just to cover coups all the time.
Well, we'll close with the hope that it is sorted out. That is all we have time for in this discussion. I hope it's been as useful to you as it has been for me. Thank you, David Roby, Barbara Drever and Robert Kahn. But we're not leaving sovereignty in the South Pacific altogether. In this week's Take Two, Sarah Daniel marks the 25th anniversary of a pivotal Waitangi Day we seem almost to have forgotten.
Waitangi, 1984. It was meant to be a momentous day. For the first time since the signing of the treaty in 1840, a representative of the Crown was to meet a peace march to hear Maori grievances. But it wasn't to be. Although Governor-General David Beattie wanted to meet Te Hekoi Te Kautahitanga, the police first wouldn't let any over, then they would let some over, and then they wouldn't let them all over. But Beattie had expressly announced, against police advice, that he would meet the entire Hekoi. Still, he waited, and waited, and waited. Meanwhile, the peaceful protest waited. All they wanted was what they'd been promised, to meet a representative of the Crown and be heard. Police had been shadowing the protest, on the lookout for wrongdoers and troublemakers. Those old ones look like trouble, don't they? Eventually time ran out and the meeting never happened. But what's interesting is the next day this was reported as disrespected Waitangi. But the media weren't talking about the way the police had treated the Hekoi. No, their comments were directed at Māori and the way they'd apparently disrespected the Governor-General by keeping him waiting. Activist and politician Hone Harawira was there.
They wanted to go for the sensational aspects of everything that we might be doing. It had nothing to do with getting an inside look at why are these people doing this? What are the real reasons? They just reported from the outside. It was always completely a media-driven point of view that the whole country got. So it didn't matter what we're doing, we were always going to look like the bad guys.
We've had to lean upon each other's strengths to get here.
If this peaceful protest was reported in that way, was it any wonder that Waitangi protests intensified? 25 years on, have we in the media picked up our game? Would it be any different today?
Hugely different today. I mean, see, we have Māori media anyway. Yeah, things have changed hugely.
Sarah Daniel with that report, and I can report that having read the New Zealand Herald's archives from that period, they make interesting reading. After the break, it's copyright and tricks with pigs.